little bit about what because you were the reason I'm asking about it was you were talking about that you did some work around interracial dialogue and stuff like that. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, when I was an academic sociologist for about 10 years, and my dissertation was on Palestinian and Jewish dialogue about the Middle East. And these are Palestinians and Jews, United States citizens of the United States. And I followed a long-term dialogue group in the 80s, back when, you didn't talk about talking to the PLO, let alone letting them back into West Bank and Gaza. So I did my dissertation on this group, and then we moved down to this area. My husband got a job at Georgetown, and I looked for work down here, and I started teaching down at Virginia Commonwealth University, and read about the Hope in the Cities interracial program. They had a grant from the Kellogg Foundation to do dialogue training in about 10 or 12 cities around the country. And so I went through their training, and I said, do you need an evaluator? Maybe I can help you with that. So I worked with them and visited a couple of cities where they were doing their training and did a lot of thinking about it. And most of the dialogue was primarily black-white dialogue, although in some places, like Portland, it was maybe more varied. It was a really good opportunity between both Jewish and Palestinian dialogue and black-white dialogue to really look at, basically I went to graduate school because I was really interested in peace studies. And so I've been really interested in social justice issues, nonviolent action, but also conflict resolution. And there's this basic tension between conflict resolution and social movement mobilization, and working for justice versus working for peace. And anybody in the field knows that there are these kinds of tensions. And what's really interesting in dialogue is you're trying to get people from 2 or 3 different communities to talk to each other. And it really helps if you structure it a certain way so that you have a good exchange and people have opportunities to be vulnerable, really talk, really share, right? But then they have to deal with the outside world and their relations with the outside world and so forth. And so it's a good thing, and it gives people a connection to the other community that they didn't have before. But there are also ways in which the power imbalances sometimes affects what happens. Sometimes it's easier for people to talk to each other as opposed to do anything. And talking is usually more important for the community that has more power in the situation. And doing something is usually more important for the community that feels like they're less powerful. But I think a lot of folks who look at dialogue and conflict resolution, they're so focused on the conflict resolution, and they want to get there. But I think one big problem is looking at how you move from that point to actually changing the community around you. And that's much more complicated. I just found that very eye-opening for me as a person. Especially somebody who grew up in Northeast Ohio and now has lived and worked in the Mid-Atlantic, where the central problem I think I think black-white relations are really, really, really central to what's happening in our cities, at least in the East Coast. I can't, and the Great Lakes. I can't really speak to the rest of the country, and so it was a really good opportunity to really see that up close. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
I wanted to find out how you relate that to relate those things to what's going on here.
Well, one thing that we know is that intergroup contact can increase conflict. Mm-hmm. It can increase prejudice. It can increase misunderstandings, mm-hmm. right? So yeah, if you're walking down the street and kids are throwing snowballs at you and they're from a different economic and racial group than you, that's going to increase conflict. But we also know that there are other ways that people can create a better understanding of each other. And for instance, some researchers have argued that if you get people together to work on a joint project and you need both people from everybody for it to succeed, then you're more likely to have a good resolution, right? So that's why, you know, I think we need more communication between people who live in Potomac Gardens and the residents outside of Potomac Gardens. But I think it also needs to be structured in such a way that it gives an opportunity for this positive relationship to emerge, because it's so easy for it to go the other way.
Well, maybe the same thing I asked the other one.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I'm interested, I totally agree with your, in my experience, the characterization of the segment of the population with power needs to talk. And it's more emotional, which is not
Right.
important, but really, but the oppressed community needs material change.
Well, and plus also it's like this one friend of mine who worked with me on the research with Hope in the City was like, I'm really tired of white people asking me to touch my hair. You know, it's kind of like, and it's sort of, you have a couple of people who do the dialogue, like Palestinians who do the dialogue, or African Americans who do the dialogue, and they're kind of like, they have to keep doing it over and over because other people don't want to do it. And they just get tired of it, yeah.
Right, right, so I'm wondering like, if, just to take an example of like, if it was slated that Potomac Gardens was going to be raised, and it was clear that, you know, like we've seen in so many other parts of the country and the city, that people were going to be displaced out of the district. And then there was resistance to that from inside Potomac Gardens and along with other people that have solidarity with communities. What do you think, I mean, you personally, but also your neighbors, do you have a sense that there would go beyond talking, saying, oh, it shouldn't be raised, but actually stepping up into a support and solidarity position?
Okay. I think for that to happen, there has to be like personal outreach to people like my neighbors, okay? I did read, not too long ago, there was some kind of public meeting at Berry Farms, and people were up in arms, and I don't know if it was Grassroots DC or some other group that was very much involved with that, okay? And there's a way in which professionals who are just sort of dealing with their jobs and their families and everything like that, even if they're like me and they have some roots in being an activist, aren't going to know how to relate to that. And so I think what would need to happen would be like something like house meetings or person-to-person connections, or that might draw people into doing something, or would at least neutralize them. You don't put that on tape. Keep them from doing anything. And the other thing I was thinking was when I went to see this film and I talked to the Urban Institute researcher, and her research assistant, by the way, lives on Potomac Avenue, and I've since met her, but I haven't really talked to her about her work. And they're looking at the promised neighborhoods. So they're doing research on that stuff now. So it might be good to talk to them. But I emailed her, I said, you know, because I would like this alternative, is there some place I should look at? And she said, well, it may be that the best alternative is people didn't want to go back. And she said something about looking at the San Francisco. See, here's what I think. I think the thing is to like, now there may be other options, but I think the thing to do is to like to negotiate for the best deal you can get. And the impression I got, I saw Anu Yadav's one-person show about Arthur Capers, and the impression I got from her show, and it's just her show, so I don't know, was that people organized against what was happening, but then people started being told, we're not going to help you if you continue to resist, and so that one by one, people gave up and just left. And I like I said, I don't know how accurate her show is, but if what I'm wondering is if there are like some kinds of things that people can really negotiate for in this whole process and stand strong about, that that might be the way to go. Like there was one research, like I said, the Urban Institute researcher told me to look at San Francisco. I have not looked at San Francisco, but my impression was that San Francisco is a place where people got a good deal, but they still went. So I don't know.